They were the giants of Hollywood's golden era, elegant, magnetic, worshipped by audiences who believed every smile, every gentle touch, every tender promise they delivered on screen. To millions, these men embodied romance itself, the idealized version of love that America eagerly embraced. But once the spotlights dimmed and the doors of their lavish homes closed, another reality took shape, one far darker than anything the cameras ever revealed. The same icons who played noble lovers and devoted husbands became sources of terror for the women married to them. Behind their polished reputations lay a truth Hollywood spent decades burying. Those mansions that appeared so glamorous from the outside were, in truth, silent arenas of domination, where fame and unchecked power shielded cruelty. Studio executives didn't simply hide affairs or drinking binges, they constructed entire narratives to disguise violence. Police bribed to look the other way, doctors pressured into secrecy, and publicists rewriting injuries into accidents. Tonight, we expose the double lives of 11 men celebrated as legends, men adored by the public while the women closest to them lived in fear. These stories are not about heated arguments or unhappy marriages. They reveal a pattern of abuse protected by a system designed to protect stars at any cost. In a time long before social media, before advocacy, before society even had the vocabulary to describe domestic violence, these women endured their suffering silently, while the men who harmed them were elevated as symbols of American masculinity. This is the Hollywood history they hoped no one would ever uncover. Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby was cherished as America's gentle dreamer, a man whose warm voice and soft charm defined an entire era of romance. On screen and on records, he appeared patient, kind, and effortlessly loving. His Christmas specials and family-friendly image made him the symbol of comfort for millions. But the man who brought peace to living rooms across the country created a very different atmosphere inside his own home. Behind closed doors, Crosby's temper shaped the rhythm of daily life. His calm public persona hid anger that could rise without warning, leaving his family constantly on edge. His first wife, Dixie Lee, lived in a house where silence became a shield, a way to avoid triggering his fury. Friends noticed how tense she seemed, how carefully she moved around him, and how she rarely contradicted him in public or private. The intimidation left her in a state her children later described as fear disguised as politeness. The truth emerged only years later through the words of Crosby's son, Gary. In his memoir, he described a childhood ruled by strict punishments, harsh discipline, and emotional coldness that left deep scars. He wrote that the image America loved, the soft-spoken father figure, had almost nothing in common with the man he and his brothers faced at home. His memories revealed a father whose anger shaped their lives more than affection ever did. Gary also painted a quiet but devastating portrait of his mother. Dixie, already struggling with her own emotional battles, was unable to protect her children from Bing's dominance. She lived in constant tension, unable to shield herself or her sons from the force of his temper. Her fear set the tone for the entire household. Hollywood worked tirelessly to preserve Crosby's wholesome image. Publicists erased rumors, spun stories, and ensured that no audience ever saw the cracks in his carefully constructed persona. To the world, Bing Crosby was warmth and gentleness. To his family, he was a source of fear they carried long after the spotlight faded. Number 2. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart became the model of classic Hollywood toughness, the man who stared danger in the eye with a cigarette between his fingers and a voice roughened by cynicism. On screen, he was controlled, steady, and unshakable. He protected the vulnerable, challenged corruption, and carried himself with a quiet sense of honor. But the man audiences admired in Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon was very different from the one his wife confronted behind closed doors. Bogart's marriage to actress Mayo Methot was one of the most chaotic relationships Hollywood ever tried to hide. What began as passion spiraled quickly into a cycle of alcohol-fueled fights, jealousy, and violence. Friends who visited their home later described scenes filled with shattered glass, screaming matches, and sudden outbursts that left the house in ruins. The press playfully called them the battling Bogarts, but the truth was far from playful. Their arguments were intense enough that no one who witnessed them ever forgot the fear in Method's voice or the rage in Bogart's. Method struggled with her own demons, including alcoholism and severe emotional instability, and during her lowest moments she could become physically volatile. But Bogart was not a helpless victim trapped in a storm. His temper, drinking, and stubborn pride fueled the conflict just as fiercely. Their marriage became a collision of two damaged people whose worst traits brought out the worst in each other. Instead of stepping away, they locked themselves in a destructive loop that neither could break. Hollywood moved quickly to protect Bogart's rising career. Studio publicists erased incidents, smoothed over rumors, and turned violent nights into lovers' quarrels. Police were quietly discouraged from documenting anything that could harm his image. By the time Bogart left Method and married Lauren Bacall, the darker years of his life had already been buried by an industry skilled at rewriting history. To the world, he became half of a glamorous Hollywood romance. To Method, he remained a man whose fury consumed their home long before the cameras ever recorded his calm heroism. Number 3. John Wayne. John Wayne stood as the towering symbol of American masculinity, the cowboy, the soldier, the man who walked through danger with steady eyes and unshakable confidence. On screen, he was the protector, the moral anchor, the hero audiences trusted without question. But the man who represented strength and righteousness to millions carried a private darkness that those closest to him understood far too well. Wayne's marriage to his second wife, Esperanza Bohr, revealed the violent side he worked tirelessly to keep out of public view. Their relationship was marked by heavy drinking, jealousy, and confrontations that escalated far beyond heated arguments. Esperanza accused him of physical violence on multiple occasions, describing nights filled with shouting, slammed doors, and moments in which she felt genuinely unsafe. Hollywood dismissed her claims as the emotional exaggerations of a troubled marriage, but friends who witnessed the aftermath knew her fear was real. His third marriage to Pilar Palet repeated many of the same patterns. Although their union lasted decades, those close to the family described a life shaped by tension, control, and Wayne's explosive temper. His drinking made his moods unpredictable, and Pilar often spoke of the emotional damage caused by his eruptions. She revealed that their home, despite its wealth and status, was a place where she constantly monitored her words and movements to avoid provoking anger. The world saw a symbol of American virtue. Pilar lived with a man whose authority left little room for safety or stability. Hollywood protected Wayne at every turn. As one of its most valuable stars, his image was too important to risk. Publicists softened every rumor, erased every troubling story, and ensured that the myth of the noble cowboy remained intact. Wayne's patriotic speeches and rugged persona created a shield stronger than any studio contract. To the public, he remained the ultimate hero. To the women who shared his private world, he was often the source of fear and emotional devastation. John Wayne's legacy continues to define the American ideal of strength. But the truth behind the icon tells a more complicated story, one where the hero adored by audiences became behind closed doors a man whose power and temper left lasting scars on the people who loved him. Number 4. Rex Harrison. Rex Harrison built his career on elegance. With his crisp voice, composed posture, and razor-sharp wit, he became the image of sophisticated charm. In films like My Fair Lady, he embodied the confident intellectual who seemed eternally in control. But the refinement audiences admired on screen hid a private cruelty that shaped every relationship in his personal life, cruelty that the industry quietly protected for years. Harrison's relationship with actress Carol Landis became one of Hollywood's most tragic whispered stories. Their affair, carried out while he was still married to Lily Palmer, began as an intoxicating romance but quickly turned into something far darker. Friends later described Harrison's behavior toward Landis as dismissive, manipulative, and emotionally brutal. He controlled the pace of the relationship while leaving her desperate for affection he withheld at will. Their final argument, said to be vicious and humiliating, pushed Landis into overwhelming despair. Hours later, she died by suicide. Harrison found her body, and instead of calling for help immediately, he called the studio first, a decision that revealed how deeply he valued his reputation above everything else. His behavior in marriage was no kinder. Lily Palmer endured years of emotional coldness and psychological pressure, often forced to smile publicly while privately struggling through Harrison's condescension and infidelity. Those who worked with him described his talent, but also his capacity for cutting remarks and calculated intimidation. His voice, the very tool that made him famous, could deliver cruelty with surgical precision. Hollywood moved quickly to protect Harrison's image. Studios buried rumors, reshaped narratives, and ensured the press portrayed him as a grieving friend rather than a destabilizing force in Landis's life. His sophistication made him marketable, and the truth of his private conduct was considered a liability no one wanted exposed. Rex Harrison's legacy still shines in classic cinema, but for the women who loved him, the polished gentleman admired worldwide was a source of manipulation, emotional violence, and deep psychological wounds. The refined man on screen was only an illusion, one carefully built to hide a much harsher reality. Number 5. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy was one of Hollywood's most respected actors, a man whose calm authority and emotional depth made every performance feel genuine. On screen, he projected fairness, compassion, and a steady strength that audiences trusted. But the image that earned him admiration worldwide collapsed the moment alcohol entered the room, revealing a violent, unpredictable side that the public never saw. Tracy's marriage to Louise Tracy suffered under the weight of his drinking. In private, his temper could erupt without warning, turning their home into a place where tension replaced comfort. Friends later recalled nights filled with shouting and frightening outbursts that left Louise emotionally exhausted. Though she never publicly detailed the abuse, those close to the family understood her separation from him was driven by fear as much as heartbreak. Their Catholic faith kept them married on paper, but the emotional wounds ran far deeper than any legal bond. His long relationship with Katharine Hepburn, often celebrated as one of Hollywood's greatest love stories, carried its own painful truths. Hepburn, fiercely independent and intelligent, saw both sides of Tracy: the warm, thoughtful man she adored, and the belligerent version of him that emerged during drinking binges. She confided to friends that his anger could fill a room like a thunderclap, leaving her anxious and cautious around him. Though she never accused him publicly, she admitted privately that living with Tracy meant constantly bracing for the next shift in mood. MGM worked relentlessly to protect him. Tracy's prestige made him invaluable, and studio executives shielded him from consequences. Police reports vanished, journalists remained silent, and any story threatening his image was buried before reaching print. Hollywood crafted a narrative of a troubled genius, glossing over the damage he inflicted on the women who loved him most. Spencer Tracy's legacy remains enormous, shaped by performances that changed American cinema. But behind the applause and accolades was a man battling demons he never confronted, demons that left scars on the women who stood beside him. The strength he portrayed on screen was a fiction. The chaos he brought into his home was the truth that Hollywood never wanted the world to see. Number 6. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra captivated the world with a voice that could move from tenderness to heartbreak in a single breath. He embodied charm, sophistication, and effortless confidence, a star whose presence made audiences feel both comforted and captivated. But behind the smooth crooning and polished tuxedos was a man whose temper could shatter the illusion of romance in an instant, leaving the women in his life caught between love and fear. Sinatra's first wife, Nancy Barbato, endured the earliest signs of his volatility. As his fame rose, so did his ego, and the pressure of constant affairs created a cycle of arguments fueled by jealousy and emotional manipulation. Friends later recalled how Sinatra's voice, gentle on stage, could turn sharp and cutting during fights, leaving Nancy overwhelmed and powerless. She rarely spoke publicly about the pain she endured, but those close to the couple understood the emotional toll their marriage took on her. His second marriage, to actress Ava Gardner, exposed his darker patterns even more clearly. Their relationship burned with passion, but was undermined by explosive fights that shook everyone around them. Gardner later admitted that Sinatra struck her during their worst confrontations. She described moments when his temper turned physical, and her own fiery personality only intensified the danger. Their arguments spiraled into shouting, broken objects, and nights where neither felt safe. Police were called more than once, but the incidents disappeared quietly, shielded by Sinatra's influence and Hollywood's desire to protect its stars. Even when he moved on to Mia Farrow and later Barbara Marx, Sinatra's temperament continued to cast a shadow over his relationships. Those who spent time around him described sudden eruptions of anger, moments when control slipped away and the room froze. He wielded his fame like armor, and his moods dictated the emotional climate of the household. The same power that enchanted audiences turned into a force that intimidated the women he lived with. Hollywood never exposed this side of him. Sinatra's connections, from studio executives to powerful figures outside the industry, ensured his reputation stayed intact. His public image remained one of elegance and romance, while the women in his life carried truths that never made it into the headlines. Frank Sinatra's voice may have defined love for an entire generation, but inside his private world, love was tangled with fear, volatility, and wounds that could not be smoothed over by any song. Number 7. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was the kind of star Hollywood rarely produces more than once in a lifetime. With his easy smile, confident swagger, and unmistakable presence, he became the king of Hollywood, adored by audiences who saw him as the perfect blend of charm and rugged masculinity. On screen, he embodied romance and strength. But the man who swept women off their feet in films carried a far more troubling energy in private, one that left the women closest to him shaken, intimidated, and often afraid. His marriage to Rhea Langham exposed a pattern of drinking, anger, and emotional cruelty that shattered the illusion of the charming gentleman. Friends who spent time with the couple spoke about heated arguments that erupted without warning. Langham endured nights of shouting and verbal humiliation, moments where Gable's temper overwhelmed any sense of safety. She confided to others that she often felt trapped, navigating a relationship ruled by insecurity and volatility that didn't resemble anything the public admired about him. Even his famously romantic marriage to Carole Lombard carried shadows that Hollywood never revealed. Lombard, bold and sharp-witted, was one of the few people capable of standing up to Gable, but even she admitted privately that his temper could cut deep. Their fights were intense and emotionally exhausting, fueled by jealousy, stress, and Gable's unpredictable moods. Lombard loved him deeply, but she also recognized how quickly his charming exterior could collapse into hostility. Beyond his marriages, troubling stories followed Gable around Hollywood. Several actresses and insiders later described encounters where Gable used his fame and physical presence to pressure women into situations they didn't want and felt powerless to refuse. These whispers never reached the headlines, protected by the studio system and by Gable's immense popularity. His status made him untouchable, and powerful publicists ensured nothing threatened his golden image. The studios built Gable into an icon, a rugged hero incapable of wrongdoing. They smoothed over every conflict, silenced every troubling rumor, and protected him from accountability. But the women who lived beside him knew the truth. They faced a man whose charm concealed a capacity for control, rage, and emotional damage, a reality far removed from the romantic fantasy projected on screen. Clark Gable's legacy endures through his legendary films, but the hidden stories from his private life reveal a man far more complicated, far more volatile, and far more dangerous than Hollywood ever dared to admit. Number 8. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas built his legacy on intensity. With his fierce stare, sharp jawline, and relentless drive, he became one of Hollywood's most powerful leading men. Films like Spartacus and Ace in the Hole showcased his commanding presence, a man who fought injustice, challenged authority, and embodied determination. But the same force that made him a star also fueled a darker side that the public rarely saw, and the women in his life endured consequences far removed from the heroic image on screen. His first wife, Diana Dill, experienced the emotional fallout of Douglas's ambition and volatility. Their marriage was marked by infidelity, explosive arguments, and a level of emotional domination that left her feeling overshadowed and insecure. Douglas himself admitted to countless affairs, treating betrayal as if it were an unavoidable part of his lifestyle. Dill confided to friends that his anger could erupt without warning, turning simple disagreements into confrontations that left her shaken and drained. As Douglas's fame grew, so did troubling stories surrounding his behavior. Numerous actresses and insiders later described encounters in which he used his status and physical presence to pressure women into situations they did not want. These stories circulated quietly for decades, whispered among those who knew the risks of speaking out against such a powerful figure. Hollywood in that era was built to protect its stars, and Douglas benefited from a system that silenced victims while safeguarding bankable men. One of the most disturbing allegations associated with Douglas involved a young actress whose promising life and career were derailed after an encounter with him. Though the details remained buried for years, the story became one of Hollywood's most haunting pieces of whispered history. Those who knew her described long-lasting emotional trauma tied to an incident she felt powerless to escape. Studios shielded Douglas aggressively. Publicists dismissed accusations as rumors, producers warned others to stay quiet, and the press avoided stories that could tarnish his image. Even later in life, as he reinvented himself as a thoughtful elder statesman, he never confronted the full weight of the harm he caused. Kirk Douglas remains celebrated as a titan of classic cinema. But beneath the accolades lies a legacy shaped not only by talent and ambition, but also by abuse, predatory behavior, and a culture that protected him while leaving victims with nowhere to turn. Number 9. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis dazzled Hollywood with his striking looks, effortless charm, and quick humor. He could be playful, seductive, or dramatic, shifting between roles with a confidence that made him one of the most desirable leading men of his time. In films, he appeared spontaneous and lighthearted, a man whose charisma felt harmless and fun. But behind the scenes, Curtis carried a darker energy, one that left the women in his life bruised emotionally, overwhelmed, and often afraid. His marriage to Janet Leigh began as a Hollywood fairy tale. They were young, beautiful, and adored by the press. But Leigh later revealed a very different reality, describing a marriage filled with selfishness, manipulation, and sudden bursts of anger that left her on edge. Curtis's jealousy and constant infidelity created an emotional cage around her. He controlled conversations, decisions, and even her social life, gradually pushing her into a place where she felt smaller, quieter, and increasingly powerless. Though he rarely struck her, Leigh said she often felt physically intimidated during their worst arguments, a fear that shaped her choices and eroded her confidence. Curtis's second wife, Christine Kaufman, was only 17 when they married, far too young to navigate the pressures of a superstar husband. Curtis's charm initially overwhelmed her, but the relationship quickly shifted into one marked by dominance and emotional pressure. Friends noticed how drastically Kaufman changed. The vibrant teenager who entered the marriage became withdrawn, nervous, and cautious, always trying to avoid triggering Curtis's temper. He expected obedience, not partnership, and his behavior left her emotionally exhausted. Those who worked with Curtis described him as talented but volatile. On set, he could switch moods abruptly, laughing one minute, shouting the next. That same unpredictability followed him home, where his partners were forced to adjust their lives to accommodate his ego, insecurities, and need for control. Hollywood protected him. Publicists erased stories, studios softened rumors, and Curtis's charming public image shielded him from accountability. The world saw the handsome heartthrob with a sparkling smile. The women who lived with him experienced a man whose charm hid manipulation, emotional cruelty, and a temper that never appeared on camera. Tony Curtis left behind a legacy filled with memorable performances. But the truth inside his home revealed a man whose insecurity and dominance caused lasting harm to the people who loved him most. Number 10. Desi Arnaz. Desi Arnaz became one of the most beloved figures in American television history. As Ricky Ricardo on I Love Lucy, he danced, laughed, and charmed his way into millions of homes. Viewers saw a warm, comedic husband whose chemistry with Lucille Ball felt effortless and real. Their on-screen marriage was joyful, affectionate, and funny, the kind of relationship audiences wished they could have. But the real marriage behind the sitcom was marked by turmoil, betrayal, and a level of emotional harm that the public never imagined. Arnaz's talent and ambition helped build Desilu Studios and turned I Love Lucy into a cultural phenomenon. But the pressure of fame, combined with his growing alcoholism, fueled a temper that often exploded at home. Lucille Ball later revealed that their private life was filled with shouting, slammed doors, and arguments that left her feeling alone despite the success they shared. Arnaz's anger wasn't constant, but when it surfaced, it changed the tone of their entire house. Ball described the emotional whiplash of living with a man who could be tender and loving one hour, then volatile and cruel the next. His infidelity was equally devastating. As Arnaz's fame grew, so did his affairs. Hollywood insiders long whispered about his constant cheating, from brief encounters to long-term relationships he tried to hide. Ball learned the truth piece by piece, and each discovery added another fracture to a marriage already weakened by drinking and temper. She later admitted that the betrayal hurt as much as the anger, a combination that left her emotionally drained and uncertain of her worth. Arnaz's behavior often worsened when alcohol took hold. Friends described episodes where he became aggressive, reckless, and impossible to reason with. Ball spent years trying to manage his moods, hoping their love and shared success would repair the damage, but the cycle continued. Despite their fame as America's favorite TV couple, their home life became a battlefield of broken trust. Hollywood protected them both, preserving the illusion of a perfect marriage. Audiences saw laughter and love. The reality was exhaustion, fear, and heartbreak. Desi Arnaz may have shaped television history, but behind the cameras, his behavior left lasting scars on the woman who built that legacy with him. Number 11. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was a force that reshaped American acting. With his raw intensity and unpredictable brilliance, he transformed every role he touched, from A Streetcar Named Desire to The Godfather. Audiences admired him as a rebel, a genius, a man unafraid to break rules in pursuit of truth. But the same unpredictable power that electrified his performances created a storm of emotional destruction in his personal life, especially for the women who lived with him. Brando's relationships were turbulent from the beginning. His marriage to Anna Cashley quickly devolved into a cycle of jealousy, manipulation, and explosive confrontations. Cashley described a marriage in which Brando's temper dominated every room, where affection and cruelty existed side by side, and where emotional security never lasted long. Their son later said the tension in that household left marks that shaped his entire life. His second wife, Movita Castaneda, faced the same instability. Brando's mood shifts were abrupt and often frightening. Friends spoke about nights filled with slammed doors, shouted accusations, and long silences that carried more threat than words. Castaneda struggled under the weight of Brando's emotional force, a force powerful enough to unsettle even the strongest personalities. Their marriage ended with deep scars that the public never saw. But his relationship with Tarita Teripaya revealed the full extent of Brando's volatility. Tarita, much younger and far less experienced in the world of Hollywood power, later described emotional abuse that left her anxious and fearful. She recalled moments of intimidation, sudden explosions of rage, and a constant feeling of walking on unstable ground. Brando's fame gave him control over every aspect of their life, and Tarita lived in a world shaped entirely by his moods. Brando's infidelities added another layer of cruelty. He moved between the affairs without apology, treating betrayal as an unavoidable part of his lifestyle. The emotional fallout from his behavior left his partners bruised in ways the public never imagined. Hollywood protected him fiercely, framing him as a troubled genius rather than holding him accountable for the pain he caused. To the world, Marlon Brando was a revolutionary talent, a man who changed film forever. But behind the brilliance lived a darker truth. A man whose emotional violence, manipulation, and unpredictable rage lasted lasting damage on the women who loved him.